Sophie Turner, David Turner, Isabella, and young Liam. What began as a seemingly perfect family life in the UK quickly spiraled into betrayal, secrets, and a night of unimaginable horror that would change their lives forever. Please subscribe for daily new update of crime story and watch till end. Sophie Turner had always been known as the heart of her small suburban neighborhood in the UK. At 35, she had built what many would call the perfect life. Her days were filled with routine and responsibility. Caring for her 8-year-old son, Liam, preparing meals, organizing the home, and making sure everything ran smoothly. To outsiders, the Turners were the ideal family. David, her husband, appeared devoted and hard-working, providing for them with steady income and occasional weekend outings that painted the perfect image of marital bliss. Their house, with its neatly trimmed garden and bright windows, symbolized the life many people aspired to. On sunny mornings, Sophie would wave at neighbors as they walked their dogs or left for work, always smiling and exchanging friendly words, giving no hint of the growing unease that had begun to seep into her life. But beneath the surface, Sophie could feel the small tremors of something she couldn't quite name. David had changed over the past few months. He no longer greeted her in the mornings with warmth, nor did he sit for breakfast with Liam, his attention often lost in his phone or computer. Sophie tried to convince herself it was just work stress, or perhaps the exhaustion of daily life. But a subtle tension grew between them that no one else could see. Even Liam, innocent and observant, began to notice the shift. He would ask questions about why his father seemed distracted, or why Sophie's smile sometimes seemed forced. Sophie reassured him with gentle words, but inside, a storm of doubt and worry was forming. Sophie had always prided herself on maintaining harmony in the household, believing that love and patience could overcome any challenge. She spent hours planning little surprises for her family, from homemade treats to weekend outings, hoping to preserve the sense of closeness she once felt with David. Yet, something had shifted. The laughter that once echoed through the Turner home had become sporadic, replaced by awkward silences during dinner and fleeting glances that conveyed unspoken distance. Sophie's nights were restless, her mind racing with questions she feared to ask aloud. She noticed the little things: David leaving the house unexpectedly at odd hours, hushed phone conversations, and a faint smell of perfume that didn't belong to her or Lee. Even her friends noticed the change. Invitations to tea or casual outings were met with polite smiles from Sophie. But behind them lay a growing anxiety she could not share. Her instincts, honed from years of protecting Liam, warned her that something was off, but she could not pinpoint what. Still, she clung to the hope that it was temporary, that David's behavior was a passing phase caused by work pressures or personal worries. In her heart, she told herself that their love, once strong and unshakable, could withstand these silent disturbances. Yet the sense of foreboding that lingered in the quiet corners of their home was impossible to ignore. Sophie felt like she was standing on the edge of a cliff, aware of an unseen danger below, powerless to step back. The idyllic image of her family life was starting to crack, and the cracks were widening every day, threatening to reveal secrets that would change everything she thought she knew about the people she trusted most. Sophie Turner had never imagined that her perfect life could be unraveling in such a quiet, insidious way. The first time she noticed the signs, they seemed almost trivial: a message notification that disappeared too quickly, a phone call that ended abruptly. But the unease in her stomach told her that something was wrong. One afternoon, while tidying the study, she noticed David's laptop left open on the desk. Normally she would have ignored it, respecting his privacy, but a sudden curiosity overcame her, fueled by a nagging feeling she could no longer dismiss. Hesitantly, she leaned over and glanced at the screen. The messages she saw made her blood run cold. David was communicating with a woman named Isabella. Their messages were intimate, secretive, and filled with promises Sophie had never thought could be made behind her back. It wasn't just the existence of the messages that hurt. It was the reality that her husband had been hiding this part of his life from her for months, maybe years. The betrayal cut deeper than anything Sophie had ever imagined. She stared at the screen, trembling, as she read through the conversations. There were plans, subtle hints, and shared moments of affection that had nothing to do with their family. Sophie's mind raced. How long had this been going on? How could she have missed the signs? Every smile, every glance, every word spoken between her and David suddenly felt hollow. Her stomach churned, and she felt a surge of panic she could not suppress. The house, once a place of comfort, now seemed suffocating. Even Liam's innocent laughter sounded distant, echoing in a home that no longer felt safe. Sophie shut the laptop, trying to steady herself, but the betrayal gnawed at her, refusing to be ignored. For days, Sophie became increasingly vigilant, observing David's every move. She noticed him slipping out for late-night errands that never made sense, returning home with an unfamiliar scent on his clothes. Calls would come at odd hours, ending abruptly when she entered the room. Friends noticed her quiet tension, and though they asked if everything was all right, Sophie smiled and nodded, concealing the storm within. She could not let anyone see the fear and confusion that had taken root in her heart. But inside, the seeded suspicion was growing into a full-blown fear. She began to feel trapped, constantly calculating her steps, unsure of how to confront David without risking the fragile balance of their household or her own safety. As Sophie pieced together the puzzle, fragments of the affair revealed themselves in unexpected ways. A receipt from a cafe she had never visited, a lipstick stain she did not recognize, and a small note tucked into David's briefcase. All subtle, yet undeniable evidence. The realization that her husband had been leading a double life shattered the illusion of their marriage. Sophie felt a mixture of grief, anger, and disbelief. She knew she could not ignore it any longer. The truth demanded acknowledgement, but she also feared the consequences. David was unpredictable, and the thought of confronting him filled her with dread. Yet Sophie understood one thing with crystal clarity. She could not allow this betrayal to continue unchecked. No matter how dangerous the path ahead might be, the hidden world behind her husband's charm had been exposed, and Sophie knew that the quiet tension in her home was only the beginning of a nightmare she could not yet fully see. Fear settled into Sophie Turner's life like a shadow that never left. After discovering David's secret affair, the small signs of danger became impossible to ignore. It started subtly, almost imperceptibly. Strange noises outside the house late at night, doors that Sophie was certain she had locked standing slightly ajar, and the occasional shadow moving just beyond her line of sight. At first, she tried to convince herself that it was her imagination, a product of stress and heartbreak, but the sense of being watched, of a presence in her home that should not have been there, only grew stronger. Sophie found herself glancing over her shoulder constantly, her nerves fraying with every creak of the floorboards. One night the phone rang. The caller ID showed no number. Sophie hesitated, a cold feeling running through her veins. When she picked up, there was silence on the other end, followed by a click. It was a small thing, but the fear it ignited in her was immense. For the first time, Sophie realized that this wasn't just about betrayal or a broken heart. Someone was intentionally sending her a message, testing her, making her aware that she was being watched. Her nights became restless. Every gust of wind against the window, every distant car horn, made her heart race. Even Liam, normally oblivious to such things, began asking if someone was outside, his small voice trembling in the darkness. Sophie tried to calm him, masking the panic she felt, but inside, a growing dread consumed her. Sophie became increasingly vigilant. She installed extra locks and checked the doors and windows multiple times a day. She noticed unfamiliar cars parked in the street during hours when they shouldn't have been, their occupants watching the house silently before driving away. Footprints appeared in the garden, smudged and half hidden in the grass, evidence that someone had been there when no one should have been. She began keeping a journal, recording every strange occurrence, trying to make sense of the growing unease. Each entry revealed a pattern. Someone was deliberately instilling fear, and it was connected to David's secret life. Sophie's world, once orderly and comforting, was now filled with uncertainty, danger, and invisible threats. Despite the fear, Sophie refused to leave her home. This was Liam's sanctuary, the place that should have been safe. She became hyper-aware of every sound, every shadow, and every movement within the house. She watched David closely, noting changes in his behavior, but he remained a mystery, hiding emotions and intentions she could no longer decipher. The quiet tension in the house became unbearable, a constant reminder that her family's life had been fractured in ways she could not yet fully understand. Sophie knew that confronting the truth was inevitable, but the thought of doing so filled her with terror. She feared not only the consequences of uncovering the affair but also the possibility that the danger had already begun to invade their home in ways she could not control. The sense of fear, once faint, now dominated her every waking moment, signaling that the nightmare was only just beginning. The tension in Sophie Turner's home had reached a breaking point. David's distance and secrecy had created an invisible wall between them, one that Sophie could no longer ignore. She tried to gather her courage, determined to confront him about Isabella and the messages she had discovered. One evening, as the sun dipped behind the houses and shadows stretched across the quiet street, Sophie found David in the living room, scrolling on his phone. Her heart pounded, and every instinct screamed at her to stay calm. She demanded answers, her voice steady despite the storm raging inside her. David's response was careful, calculated, almost soothing. He promised that he would end the affair, that it had never meant anything, that he loved her and Liam. For a moment, Sophie almost believed him. The tension in her chest eased slowly and she allowed herself to hope that the nightmare might end. But hope was dangerous, and Sophie had no idea that David had already formed a plan that would shatter every illusion she held about their life together. Behind the mask of compliance, he was calculating, plotting a way to silence Sophie permanently. He had reached out to Isabella, and together they had begun weaving a dark, secret strategy. Isabella, with her own hidden motives, was willing to do whatever it took to secure her position in David's life. The two of them believed that removing Sophie from the equation would free them from any obstacles, giving them the life they desired without fear of exposure. Neither seemed to consider the consequences for Liam, the innocent child who was the silent witness to a growing storm that neither Sophie nor anyone else could yet see in its full, terrifying scope. As days passed, Sophie tried to maintain a sense of normalcy for Liam's sake. She prepared his breakfast, helped him with homework, and read him bedtime stories, all while the unease in her chest grew heavier with each passing hour. She noticed subtle signs that something was brewing, small details that David failed to conceal. A certain look exchanged between him and Isabella on the phone, a hidden note left behind, a brief text that vanished before her eyes. The sense of impending danger became almost tangible, like a heavy fog settling over the house. Sophie's mind raced with possibilities, each more terrifying than the last. She knew she had to be careful. Every word, every action, every glance could trigger consequences she was unprepared for. Sophie began considering the unthinkable. How could she protect Liam if things escalated further? She felt trapped, surrounded by threats she could see but could not yet fully confront. The tension between David and Isabella was no longer subtle. It radiated like a current, dangerous and unpredictable. Sophie realized that this was no longer just about betrayal, it was about survival. The plan that David and Isabella were forming was deliberate and methodical, and Sophie could sense its deadly intent without knowing the full details. Every night she lay awake, listening to the quiet creaks of the house, trying to anticipate what would happen next. Fear had become a constant companion, but so had determination. Sophie knew that the coming days would test every ounce of her courage, and she braced herself for a confrontation that could change her life and Liam's forever. The storm outside mirrored the chaos that had been building inside Sophie Turner's home for weeks. Dark clouds pressed against the windows, and rain battered the roof like the drumbeats of an approaching disaster. Sophie had sensed for days that something terrible was about to happen, and tonight, every instinct screamed that the danger was close. She moved quietly through the house, checking the locks, securing windows, and making sure Liam was asleep. His soft breathing from the bedroom upstairs should have been comforting, but it only deepened her anxiety. The house no longer felt like a sanctuary. It had become a cage filled with unseen threats, where every shadow could hide betrayal and violence. The first sound came as a subtle creak from the hallway. Sophie froze, her pulse quickening. She knew immediately that someone was in the house. Her mind raced, trying to anticipate what she should do. It wasn't a stranger. She recognized the steps, the deliberate quietness, the familiarity of the intruder. David. Her husband had orchestrated this night with a precision that chilled her. Behind him was Isabella, hiding in the shadows, waiting for the perfect moment to strike. Sophie's heart pounded as the reality settled over her. Her worst fears were coming true. The betrayal, the secrecy, the warnings she had tried to dismiss, they were all leading to this. Sophie fought to keep her composure, trying to think clearly despite the fear that had paralyzed her. She had never faced anything like this before. Every instinct told her to protect herself and Liam, but she was trapped, caught between the people she had once loved and the danger they now represented. As David moved closer, the tension in the air became almost unbearable. Sophie tried to reason with him, to appeal to the man she had married, but she realized that the person in front of her was no longer the same man she had trusted. This David, consumed by selfish desire and deception, had become a threat she could not escape. Isabella stepped from the shadows, her presence confirming the depth of the conspiracy. Together, she and David cornered Sophie, leaving her with no choice but to fight for her life. Sophie struggled, using every ounce of strength she had, but the attack was swift and brutal. Pain and fear mingled as she realized that her life, and the life of her son, hung by a fragile thread. Liam stirred upstairs, hearing the sounds of the struggle. He couldn't understand what was happening, only that something terrible had invaded the safety of his home. He hid under his bed, trembling, clutching his favorite toy, while the horror unfolded just steps away. The minutes dragged on, each one stretching into what felt like an eternity. Sophie's mind raced with memories of better times, of laughter and love, now tainted by the dark reality that had taken hold. She knew there was no time to hesitate. Her movements were desperate, calculated, but ultimately overpowered by the combined force of David and Isabella. The house, once filled with warmth, became a battlefield where trust had been replaced with treachery. The storm outside raged on, echoing the violence within, as Sophie faced the night that would forever change the course of her family's life. Morning arrived with a heavy, uneasy silence. The storm had passed, leaving the Turner house drenched and eerily quiet. Sunlight filtered weakly through rain-streaked windows, but the brightness did little to warm the home that had been transformed into a place of horror overnight. Sophie Turner's absence was immediately felt. Liam, still curled up in his bed, shook slightly, holding his favorite blanket tightly. He could barely comprehend what had happened. The night's chaos lingered in the air, every corner of the house a reminder of the violence that had shattered the illusion of safety. The once orderly home now seemed cold and empty, the familiar rooms transformed into a space haunted by fear and loss. David acted quickly, donning the mask of a grieving husband. He called the authorities, his voice trembling as he described what he claimed had been a tragic accident. He spoke of intruders he said had broken into the house, leaving Liam unharmed, but Sophie fatally injured. The neighbors, shocked by the news, gathered in whispered speculation, unable to reconcile the image of the perfect family with the brutality that had occurred. Behind David's facade, however, the truth remained hidden, a dark secret that only he and Isabella knew, a conspiracy that had brought unimaginable suffering to the Turner family. Liam, innocent and fragile, became the silent witness to the aftermath. Though he was too young to understand fully, he remembered the sounds, the crashes, the fear that had gripped him as he hid under his bed. He clung to the fragments of comfort he could find, his blanket, his small toys, and the faint hope that his mother might still be there. But Sophie was gone, her life extinguished by the very people who had promised to protect her. Liam's small voice, whispering her name, echoed through the empty rooms, a haunting reminder of the tragedy that had unfolded. The neighborhood struggled to make sense of the events. Friends and relatives visited, offering condolences and trying to provide comfort to a child whose innocence had been violently interrupted. They could see the trauma etched into Liam's face, the fear that would not easily be erased. Meanwhile, investigators arrived, piecing together the first fragments of evidence. They examined the house, noting the signs of forced entry, or what appeared to be forced entry, trying to construct a narrative that matched David's story. Yet the investigators were unaware that the most important details, the motives and the orchestration of the crime, lay concealed beneath a carefully maintained deception. Even in the calm of the morning, a sense of dread lingered in the air. Every shadow, every quiet creak, reminded those inside that violence had touched this home, leaving scars that would not fade. The perfect family image that had once defined the Turners was gone, replaced by a stark reality. Secrets and betrayal had led to destruction. David's duplicity, Isabella's involvement, and the consequences of their actions would ripple outward, touching lives far beyond the house on this quiet street. The tragedy that had occurred was not just a private sorrow, it became a chilling example of how trust and love could be twisted into danger, leaving only fear, grief, and unanswered questions in its wake. The investigation into Sophie Turner's death began quietly, but quickly gained momentum as the police examined the evidence left behind. At first, David's story seemed plausible, a grieving husband describing a violent intruder, but the detectives' instincts told them something was off. Small inconsistencies in his account began to emerge. Footprints that did not match any known neighbor, traces of someone else's presence in the home, and messages recovered from David's phone hinted at a secret life that no one had suspected. Each discovery deepened the mystery, revealing layers of deception that had been carefully hidden from view. Detectives began to focus on David's recent behavior, scrutinizing his movements, calls, and interactions in the weeks leading up to Sophie's death. They discovered patterns that suggested premeditation rather than a random act of violence. David's affair with Isabella, once concealed behind closed doors and whispered messages, became a central point in the investigation. The police realized that this was not just a crime of passion, it had been planned. Isabella's involvement added a chilling dimension. She had been complicit, waiting for the right moment to act, her motivations intertwined with David's ambitions and desire to remove Sophie from the picture. Liam, the young boy who had witnessed fragments of the horrifying night, became a key figure in the investigation. Though traumatized and frightened, he held vital memories. With gentle care and patience, investigators encouraged him to recall what he had seen and heard. He remembered shadows moving in the dark, voices that did not belong to his mother, and the sudden chaos that had shattered his sense of security. His recollections, though fragmented by fear and confusion, painted a picture that contradicted David's carefully constructed story. Liam's testimony, innocent yet compelling, gave the detectives the breakthrough they needed to start unraveling the truth. Forensic evidence further reinforced the suspicions. Surveillance footage from nearby streets showed a vehicle parked suspiciously outside the Turner house the night of the murder. Clothing fibers and traces of blood in unlikely places suggested a struggle, contradicting the narrative of an outside intruder. Every piece of evidence pointed in one direction: the danger had come from within, from people Sophie had trusted the most. Detectives pieced together the timeline meticulously, reconstructing the night's events in detail, revealing the calculated nature of the attack and the deliberate betrayal that had led to her death. The small suburban neighborhood that had once admired the Turner family now grappled with shock and disbelief. Friends, neighbors, and even distant relatives struggled to understand how a home so seemingly peaceful could conceal such darkness. David and Isabella's plan, so carefully executed, was beginning to crumble under the weight of truth. The investigation exposed the chilling reality that lies, deception, and secret desires could turn a loving home into a place of terror. For Liam, the revelations were bittersweet. Justice was beginning to take shape, but the emotional scars from witnessing his mother's murder and the betrayal of his father would remain, a haunting reminder of the night that changed his life forever. The case against David Turner and Isabella quickly moved forward as investigators presented the mounting evidence. The web of lies carefully spun to appear convincing, began to unravel under the weight of forensic analysis, witness accounts and Liam's brave recollections. Each detail, from the hidden messages to the surveillance footage, exposed the chilling orchestration of Sophie's murder. David's carefully constructed facade of grief crumbled in court, revealing the cold calculation behind his actions. Isabella, once hidden in the shadows, was tracked down in a neighboring city, her involvement undeniable. Their plan, meant to eliminate Sophie and secure their future together, had collapsed, leaving only justice to answer for the lives they had shattered. The trial was intense and emotionally charged. Liam, now living with relatives who tried to shield him from further trauma, was present in court, a silent witness to the truth. The young boy's testimony, limited by his age, but vivid in its emotional clarity, revealed details of the night that David and Isabella could not deny. Every word he spoke painted a picture of fear and betrayal, of a mother struggling against forces she had once trusted to protect her. The courtroom was tense, filled with neighbors, friends and family members who had once believed in the image of a happy household. Each revelation added layers of horror, forcing everyone present to confront the stark reality that trust can be twisted into danger and that appearances can be deadly deceptive. When the verdict was finally delivered, David was convicted of Sophie's murder, and Isabella received a lengthy prison sentence as his accomplice. The community felt a mixture of relief and lingering unease. Justice had been served, but the emotional and psychological damage remained. Liam, though safe from his father's betrayal, faced a long path of recovery. He struggled with nightmares, memories of the night, and the haunting knowledge that those he should have been able to trust were the ones who had caused the most harm. Counseling and therapy became crucial for him, helping him process the trauma and begin the slow journey toward healing. The Turner home, once a symbol of domestic bliss, was now marked by tragedy and loss. Neighbors still spoke in hushed tones about the events, and the story of Sophie's murder served as a cautionary tale about the dangers of hidden betrayals and secret desires. The quiet streets that had seemed so safe now carried an echo of fear, a reminder that darkness can exist even in the most familiar places. Sophie's life, cut short by the selfish ambitions of those closest to her, left a void that could never be filled, a stark reminder of the fragility of trust and the consequences of deception. Even as justice prevailed, the emotional scars remained. Liam, growing up under the care of loving relatives, learned to navigate a world forever altered by the events of that stormy night. Memories of his mother lingered, bittersweet and painful, but they also served as a guiding light in his life, a reminder of the love that had been lost and the strength he would need to endure. The tragedy of the Turner family became a story that would not be forgotten, a chilling testament to the devastating power of secrets, betrayal, and the unimaginable consequences when love is twisted into danger.